now to my most favorite part of the interview, where I get to ask you about Chanakya, because I shouldn't be saying this probably on camera, but I'm a huge admirer of Chanakya's chant and all your other works.
Thank you. You are too sweet, and you're making me feel very elated right now.
No, I think you deserve to be elated. So Ashwinji, I've read Chanakya's chant at least thrice, and I've also read Chanakya's Arthashastra from the security of from the national security prism while I was doing my master's. So there's a lot of interaction that happens. Now, Chanakya is somebody, if India had not rediscovered his works, we wouldn't have known about the glories of our past at all, and the strategies that he wrote thousands of years ago. This is something of a dream that you can't even think of, essentially. So given your study of Chanakya and Arthashastra, how relevant do you think Chanakya is and Arthashastra is to today's India, especially since we face a lot of geopolitical competition?
Sure. I mean, I've always maintained that our country forgot Chanakya, we forgot Kautilya, we forgot the Arthashastra, whereas China remembered Sun Tzu. And I think that is one very important distinction between these two countries. But right. Since the question is specifically around Chanakya, well, we all know that Kautilya, or this individual called Vishnugupta, was amongst India's greatest strategists, economists, and statesmen. His writings, of course, include the Arthashastra and the Niti Shastra, and they are variously quoted by gurus, politicians, diplomats. But this man, born somewhere around 375 BCE, is believed to have devised the diplomatic, political, and military and economic strategy by which Chandragupta was able to seize power and fashion the mighty Mauryan Empire. In fact, Chanakya is probably India's first political scientist and economist. So it is a puzzle as to why we have forgotten him. And why do we also, Sharan, this really bugs me, why do we condescendingly call him the Indian Machiavelli? After all, Niccolo Machiavelli lived around 1,850 years after Chanakya, and his political treatise, The Prince, does not even cover a fraction of Chanakya's intellectual landscape.
Correct.
Now, this apathy could be attributed to the fact that the Arthashastra remained lost in the sands of time for many centuries after the decline of the Mauryan Empire. And it was only in 1904 that Dr. Shyama Shastri transcribed and translated the work and made it available to the entire world. And suddenly the world rediscovered Chanakya and his wisdom. But until then, India's British rulers had assumed that our native ideas of governance in India had been borrowed from the Greeks. The rediscovery of Chanakya is what put paid to those notions.
Right.
But what did we do with Chanakya's wisdom after we rediscovered it? Unfortunately, very little. For example, take Chanakya's views on taxation. Chanakya says, just as one plucks fruits from a garden as they ripen, so shall a king have the revenue collected as it becomes due. Just as one does not collect unripe fruits, he shall avoid taking tax that is not due, because that will make the people angry and spoil the very sources of revenue. Now, these were words penned 2,300 years ago. But ask any Indian entrepreneur or foreign investor, and they will tell you that the biggest obstacle to Indian growth are complicated taxation policies, arbitrary orders, and incompetent tax administration. So, over the past few decades, we Indians have almost become thick-skinned when confronted by scams and corruption. But 2 millennia ago, Chanakya was cognizant of the problem. He wrote, just as it is impossible to know when a fish moving in water is drinking it, so it is impossible to find out when government servants in charge of undertakings misappropriate money. But Chanakya did not stop at simply recognizing the problem. Instead, he devised several checks and balances to minimize it. For example, he mandated that government officials should not be relatives of the king. That would enable the monarch to quickly punish officers when they indulged in malpractice. Each government department was required to maintain a profit center account submit to an annual audit, and follow a uniform accounting year of 354 days. Remember, this was 2 millennia ago. I mean,
Yeah.
it is truly fascinating. Sometimes the Arthashastra, since you've read it, reads almost like an ancient day McKinsey report. You know,
It does.
in your
Yeah.
geopolitical sphere, Chanakya was way ahead of us with his Rajmandala theory. Your
Yes.
neighbor is your natural enemy, and your neighbor's neighbor is your friend. And just observe India's neighborhood, and you would instantly see the importance of his words. It was in the context of Rajamandala that Chanakya outlined his strategies of Saam Daam Bhed and Dand. He had advised that the first method always that should be applied should be Sam or conciliation, gentle persuasion, praise. If that doesn't work, then move on to Dan, rewards, gifts, monetary benefits, sometimes even bribes. Next, one could employ stealth, intelligence, propaganda, and covert operations, which is Bhed. And finally, if all options are exhausted, then one employs Dand or force, military action and punishment. So Chanakya was unabashed about not being too idealistic or rigid in one's principles. There is no point in being too upright, he wrote. You would see by going to the forest that straight trees are cut down while the crooked ones are left standing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there is a certain amount of real politic to what Chanakya was talking about.
Right.
But even beyond governance, the principles of the Arthashastra can be applied to modern management almost seamlessly. For example, Chanakya said, a king can reign only with the help of others. One wheel alone does not move a chariot. Does that sound familiar? I mean, remember Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, who said great things in business are never done by one person. They're done by a team of people. I mean, in that sense, the concepts have not changed. The intrinsic value of teamwork shines through Chanakya's words. Take another management idea, that of time. Chanakya says, time perfects all living beings as well as kills them. Time alone is awake when all others are asleep. Even a minute of one's life cannot be obtained, even for 1,000,000 gold coins. If time is not used purposefully, what loss is bigger than that? I mean, it could almost be the words of a modern management theorist. While the world remembers Chanakya as the shrewd and ruthless tactician, we seem to have forgotten his contribution to the idea of good governance. The word Arthashastra is a combination of two words, Artha and Shastra. The former, of course, means wealth or well-being. The latter means science. So the resultant word actually denotes the science of prosperity, the science of well-being. And there is virtually no aspect of state administration that Chanakya does not address. He defines the daily routine of the monarch, civil and criminal penalties, operations of the secret service, tax structure, width of chariot roads, mining, organization structure of government, animal husbandry, agriculture, bureaucratic employment rules, consumer protection laws, judicial procedures, disaster management, property rights, infrastructure development, drainage, you name it, he's covered it. With all his pragmatism and ruthlessness, however, one thing must be not forgotten, Sharan, that there is a nobility of purpose that shines through in Chanakya's world. Much before philanthropy and corporate social responsibility became buzzwords, Chanakya explained it is essential for stagnant water to have a little flow for its purity, and it is necessary to donate part of one's wealth for its protection. And finally, he went on to say, and this is the most important bit, my favorite line from Chanakya's teachings: in the happiness of his subjects lies the king's happiness. In their welfare, his welfare. He shall not consider as good only that which pleases him, but treat as beneficial to him whatever pleases his subjects. I really wish we could take some words out of the Arthashastra and actually implement them as part of our policy. Even though they are 2,300 years old, they are still very, very relevant even to the present.
Absolutely. I mean, whenever I interact with my peers who are into China studies, you see, I hear a lot of anecdotes about Sun Tzu and other philosophers, but somehow we have lost that pride in our own history and in our own strategic thinkers of the past, you know. And somehow people like you are popularizing their works and at least getting kids interested into that. Like, I remember the first time I seriously took, I mean, this was way long back when I was a teenager. I took Chanakyas very seriously, and I wanted to read more about him was through your book. And thank you for all the seva that you've done through your writings.
Thank you, Sharan. I'm glad that I was able to prompt you or encourage you in a certain direction. I have always maintained that any of my books written in the Bharat series should be treated as a pretty much as a starting point of a journey. And that's the reason why I spent so much time building up the bibliography and the references in my what are otherwise normally in fiction thrillers, you don't see references.
Right.
But I always provide you with references in my thrillers. The reason being because there are so many people who get interested in a subject. I would really like them to be able to dig deeper and go into the very sources that I utilized in order to get there.
Right.
So one of the, like for example, Chanakya's chant, the primary resources were Arthashastra and the Mudra Rakshas. So I would ideally like people to go back to those works and look at them.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. धन्यवाद, नमस्कार.